The Murder Shelf Book Club contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. I am your host, Jill. This is my special episode 140, and I'm a little nervous about this one because of the stature of the author that I will be chatting with. I recently met her in person at Crimecon 2025 in Denver. So today I have the honor of speaking with a woman that I have admired for well over 40 years, the irreplaceable Dr. Ann Wolbert Burgess, author of her new book, Expert Witness: The Weight of Our Testimony When Justice Hangs in the Balance. I strongly encourage everyone to buy her book as it reflects on her participation and testimony in a number of high-profile cases, including those of the Menendez brothers, Bill Cosby, and Larry Nassar. Dr. Burgess's objective and expert analysis, no pun intended, has significantly influenced the pursuit of justice in complex cases. Her compassion shines through in her work as she consistently bases her testimony on facts, decades of experience as a researcher, and as a leading forensic psychiatric nurse. Dr. Burgess began her education and career in the mid-20th century and then spent over 2 decades working with the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit. During this time, she collaborated with John Douglas and Robert Ressler, developing and establishing criminal profiling as a valuable tool for law enforcement. While managing her professional responsibilities, she also balanced marriage and the upbringing of 4 children. A true pioneer and a role model, Dr. Burgess achieved remarkable success at a time when career options for women were limited mainly to careers in nursing, secretarial work, teaching, or you could become a nun. All admirable career choices. She graduated from Boston University with a degree in nursing and a Bachelor of Science. Subsequently, she earned her Master's of Science from the University of Maryland and completed her Doctorate of Nursing Science at Boston University. Along the way, Dr. Burgess provided critical analysis and input in her field, co-authoring many important works, including Rape, Victims of Crisis, Sexual Assault of Children and Adolescents, Homicide, Patterns and Motives, and Victimology, Theories and Applications. Additionally, she contributed by authoring forensic nursing textbooks. In 2016, she was honored as a living legend by the Academy of Forensic Nursing, and I heartily agree. In 2024, Hulu released a docuseries about the life and contributions of Dr. Burgess, titled Mastermind: To Think Like a Killer, which again, I highly recommend. She is the leading authority on rape and sexual trauma and is a professor of forensic nursing at Boston College, mentoring a new generation of expert witnesses. So let me welcome Dr. Ann Wolbert Burgess to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast.
Thank you very much, Jill. I'm happy to be here.
How did you like Crimecon?
Oh, I loved it. I love Crimecon. There's so many good people there and lots of energy and lots of walking. Oh my gosh. Places are huge.
I call it my Crimecon diet.
Yeah, that's a good term. Yeah, you almost need roller skates. I thought I'll bring my roller skates next time.
I thought about getting one of those scooters like that you step on
scooter.
and they,
yeah, and just scoot. Yeah.
Yeah. With that said, I love true crime books. I love true crime stories, and your contribution is just amazing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I read your book, Expert Witness, and found it so comprehensive. I learned more about what rape victims and victims of sexual abuse suffer than ever before. Very well done. Your compassion comes through. At the same time, your objectivity.
You have to be. You've got to have the objectivity, or it can get you. You can't. You have to stay very calm and focused on the details that you're hearing.
Well, if someone is coming to you as an expert witness, that you would think would be the minimum. But we're in a culture where there is a rush to judgment in the media, depending on how the case is portrayed. And it's not always correct.
That's right. It isn't. Rarely. In the beginning, rarely was it in any way projected because they would just get into, they'd only say the person was raped. And sometimes the victim would only say that because nobody followed up with any detail. So when you don't get detail, the person is who you're talking to is allowed to think of what rape means to them. And that can be such a 180, obviously, compared to who has gone through the experience.
Yes. I mean, you've testified, I should say, for the prosecution, you've testified for the defense.
Yes.
And it seems to me that when I would assume you're requested by one or the other.
Yes.
How do you decide to take the case?
And sometimes I'm asked by both sides, so even a third. Well, the first person that calls, you have to answer. I could answer it if I didn't want to take it with, show me the evidence, and let's see if I can help in that way. You've got to have evidence. And so often they're going to say on these types of cases, well, she said, he said. And that's hard. But you can still get details that really would help a jury understand that there's no other way she could have gotten details if it hadn't actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I go for, tell me what you have. I look over what they have. I can always turn down a case, but then I don't feel I have any right to, if the other side calls me, to say I'd go with them. I would say, no, I'm not doing the case, period, for either side. There have been times, especially on child cases, where they haven't wanted the child to have to go through a lot of experts, that a judge will make the determination, have both sides submit the names of an expert, and if they each pick one with the same name, then the judge is liable to say, let's have that person, expert, interview the child and come up with the report. Because the report can then be attacked, if you will, either side. And that's fair. I mean, it is court. You don't go to court if there isn't a conflict. That's the nature of a report.
Well, it's an adversarial system.
That's
and
right.
For a reason. Because
That's right.
The state must present their case if it's criminal without a reasonable doubt. The defense is certainly going to defend to the best of their ability. And that's the system. It's imperfect, but many times it does work the right way.
You know, the UK has an interesting model. I've never testified or been asked to do a UK case, but they have each expert for each side do their report, and then they come together and they have to agree and write a report. Yeah, I think that's really not agree on, obviously not on all things, but to say maybe we think X, Y, and Z happened. Because I've never done it, I don't know exactly how it's done, but I understand that is a very interesting process.
Yes, I can imagine that. You know, I have to think it would make it a little bit easier for the jurors to weigh, because in the United States, you have two conflicting experts. You know, one is saying A and the other is saying oranges.
Correct.
You know, you have to weigh the testimony with the rest of the evidence that's presented.
Right.
I have to bring up the Menendez case because it's been in the news so much lately.
Sure.
And
yes.
But in the Menendez case, I remember when this happened. I was an adult, I was working, I was young, but I remember. And I absolutely remember the disbelief that teenage boys could have been sexually abused. And I believe, my opinion, that that went hand in hand with if a female teacher was accused of sexually abusing a male student, there was a lot of this, so what? Like boys cannot be victims or traumatized.
Correct.
And I saw that happening. Now, again, with hindsight, I don't remember thinking, well, they should get off. We knew they killed their parents, but that case, I mean, here you were speaking for the defendant.
Right. And I spoke for the defendant in terms of the defendants. Actually, I was on Eric's team. They divide you up by teams. For what he said to me, or he did do some drawings. I think that's come out. But I think it goes back to this. If you just hear that he has been sexually abused and you don't get any details, you have to conjure up in your own mind what that is. That's the problem. And even the prosecutor said, I believe she said, I wasn't there for it, but I understand she said males cannot be sexually abused because of, and she meant the actual biological part of it. And I never quite understood that, but at any rate, that's what happened, about 35 years ago. So you have to get into the details and what is said to them. Then don't forget some of the language that was used was, well, this is what fathers do with their sons. This is part of the culture, kind of. I think that's where it was going in terms of some of the language that Jose, the father, used with the sons. And that normalizes it, if you will. And don't forget, some of the molestation is not painful. And it certainly has a physiological response. So I don't know why people would think it couldn't happen to males any more than it could happen to females. But I think it's always interesting. People have said, what if they had been the Menendez sisters? Would this have been a similar outcome? And I have to say, well, it would be interesting if it was the mother that had sexually abused the son versus the father. So you'd also have to look at it both ways. But I always think that that is interesting. I also have recently written a chapter in a book where we compare the Menendez brother. It's a double parricide case, but there is a Lizzie Borden was a case of a single parricide where she was accused of killing both parents.
Yeah.
Even though the sister, I wonder in that case how much the sister had been involved. That's always been a curious factor for me, especially after doing the Menendez case. So I think you need to also look at these cases in historical context and not just say, well, this can't happen. Boys can't be abused. Well, of course they can be.
Well, human beings can be abused.
Yes, right. Yeah.
I think that is irrelevant, but I think it's taken us some time as a culture to get to that point of understanding.
I agree. Yes. 35 years ago, that was certainly not on anyone's radar.
No, I think we have a ways to go. I think there's still a lot of misunderstandings about rape, which is why I think this book is so important.
Right. But they got a lot of things wrong there. Remember, they said, well, they're big boys. They can just, why don't they just leave? They planned to leave. And I tried to point that out, that next week they were going to go to college. They would be out of the house. And yet nobody picks that up. It's like, well, they should have, So there are a lot of things that had so much bias in that case. So I was curious to see this time whether it would be a 1990 verdict versus a 2025 verdict. And of course, we see that it was a 1990 verdict on that. And I see that more recently, I think in the last week, there's been another statement by the judge of the appeals. They had appealed another part of that. And he said that they said, well, why wouldn't you consider the new evidence of the letter? Right. And he said that slightly could make a difference. Slightly could make a difference. And he denied them again.
Yeah.
That one said it goes back to the planning and so forth, that the planning part. That's what he was making his decision on.
Well, they certainly did plan it. But listen, when you have new evidence that I think it's pretty confirming that sexual abuse absolutely happened. This is a letter that was written before the murders that
Correct.
somebody found going through drawers in a trunk. It wasn't
Correct.
like they set out to create a document and forge it or something. And it's like, hey, he's actually discussing this with a cousin and said, hey, this is happening. There
And
was so
that
much question as to whether it was even real.
Right, right. And that was to a cousin that he actually had testified also back in the 90s, Andy. So they didn't want to hear it. I mean, that's the other thing, that you get denial, that the person is not telling the truth, and so once you get that in your head, you're going to filter anything you hear through that. Well, it's still not true, just not true. So what a case.
You said one of the most important things is keeping an open mind.
Yes.
And in our system, you are innocent until proven guilty.
You would think so. Yes.
Well, I hang on to that a lot. I catch myself every once in a while and I make sure the allegedly,
Sure.
comes out of
Yeah.
my mouth.
Well, and the other thing is, look at the case that I did put in the expert witness book on the Duke lacrosse case. It took, what, 10, 15 years for Crystal Magnum to finally admit she lied
Yeah.
on accusing the three young men.
Yeah.
But she did eventually, but look at how long it took. It certainly didn't help back in those early days. But we had figured out that couldn't have happened. But I was prepared to describe what I thought had happened, that without saying that she was not telling the truth, because that would have been too hard, I think, for a jury. You want to give an explanation. And of course, I didn't have to testify because the case fell apart before all of that. But that's a good example of, after years, it could come through that they admit that they didn't tell the truth.
From what you wrote, I think she believed in the moment that something happened. And you speak of confabulation, where you kind of fill in the gaps in your memory. You're not even realizing you're doing it.
Right.
And I think it was a perfect storm to accuse these young men and have this whole thing go crazy when there was a lot of evidence that the timeline that they were talking about just didn't work.
Didn't work. And the partner she had, the other young woman, didn't believe that it happened either. They didn't play that up as much as they should have. Because she'd been with her, obviously. They had come to do this little performance for the boys, and didn't work.
It went poorly.
It went poorly, to say it mildly, yes.
I wanted to ask you also about the Bill Cosby case, because that and those women who were impacted by that, I think that had a long-term impact, because
Yes.
that role of celebrity,
Yes.
that was insulation for him for decades.
Absolutely. And that's what Andrea would say, is this is everybody's dad. How can you say anything about him? And he was so clever and so smooth, really. He would always, at least in her case, he had the mother involved, almost called her mom when they would talk on the phone. So he was playing up the relationship as well as the daughter, and promised, I can make it big for you. I can get you people. I think Andrea was thinking of doing a broadcast or something in the sports world. That was her world at that time, was basketball. And it sounded perfect, because that can happen. But what can't happen is, of course, the sexual abuse. And it was such a pattern. When I heard about 35 of those women that came forward, it all had a very similar pattern. So why people couldn't believe that? And he had paid off. There had been money exchanged. He had a number of cases where money was exchanged to buy the silence. So that happened too. It was a complicated case. But I think Andrea really had such strength to come forward.
Oh, absolutely.
But how many symptoms? I think what people don't understand is that happens, but there is a trauma reaction. And so she couldn't go on just as if nothing happened. She had to go back to Canada. She had a good job over at Temple, as a basketball coach or something along that line. But she found that she just couldn't manage. She was so symptomatic, goes home, doesn't say anything. And the mother says, Andrea, what's the matter? Mother sees that something's up. And then Andrea was scared to tell her mother because her mother liked Cosby so much. But the mother the mother was good. And I think the other thing that scared the mother and certainly scared me is when you heard what happened and he let her go home after he had given her those medications. She's lucky she could drive. He didn't even pay for her safety. That was very dangerous to send somebody out that's had some type made unconscious from the medication they gave.
Clearly the victims, their care, he was done with her. That was never going to be in his thinking. He was done. He'd done his thing. Go off on your way. Move on. Move along.
He even offered her a cup of tea and a biscuit or something, as if nothing happened. She couldn't believe it.
Right.
And people couldn't. It was hard for people to believe. And then she couldn't talk about it for months. So you had your delayed disclosure, which is always hard. You have to explain that to the jury. Why didn't she just immediately come forward? That's just not the way it's done. That's not reality. People just don't. Even in our original study, half of the victims had somebody else take them to the hospital. They didn't even realize what had happened to them. So,
yeah. I hate to say it, but who really wants to relive their trauma and talk to strangers about something like this? It's embarrassing and you're angry it happened and all the emotions that come. Who wants to do? I don't want to talk about sex with strangers.
Yeah. See, that's the dynamics of a secret. It's really hard because if you tell, then you've opened up yourself to other people's reaction. When you keep it to yourself, yes, you may suffer, but at least you don't have to deal with everybody else's reactions. But the victims find they can't. They can't hide their trauma. Their lifestyle changes. They don't want to go out. They want their eating or sleeping. Everything gets affected.
Yeah. My heart went out to them. I mean, I have to tell you, at first when I heard this about Bill Cosby, and I was like, oh, yeah, right, sure.
Yeah.
But then same thing, when you start hearing now more, and it's a similar story, guilty. You and detecting patterns.
Yeah, it's the pattern.
In addition to listening, your ability to analyze information and recognize the patterns, I think that's your superpower.
Yes, you're right. Yes.
I think that's why you wound up working with the FBI and doing the criminal profiling.
Right. I mean, they could tell me the patterns, but we had to document it. That's where it paid off. We could document it.
Yeah. And it's still out there, criminal profiling being a fantastic tool in the toolbox of the many tools.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And they should be moving into the AI area because what AI machine learning does is looks for the patterns.
Yes.
Yes, it can go through so much data so fast. I'm surprised that they haven't been able to move on that, so to speak.
They're not using AI?
No, I was on a Quantico just this week, and that was I did a past, present, and future presentation where we looked, obviously, and the future, of course, was we've been doing work with machine learning and topic modeling because it picks up the patterns. It also gives you clues on areas you might not think of to do an investigation. But they didn't want to do it. They felt that they have their information is so private. And I said, you don't have to disclose who it is or anything like that. You're looking for patterns. But anyway, they have a ways to go. That's my opinion.
It's genius. I think you're correct. They're going to have to work themselves through it. And in 15 years, we're going to be hearing about this fascinating new thing that they've using, name it some acronym that has, special meaning.
Well, the interesting thing is in the mid-90s, artificial intelligence was the big thing in computers. And my husband works with computers. And he said, this would be really good for your project down at the BSU. So we presented it. And what was the answer? This is Star Wars stuff. This isn't something we're going to get into. I thought, Star Wars stuff. Oh, so now that's over 25 years ago.
Okay, they're a little slow.
It's very hard for some of these big systems. There's so many layers you have to go through to get anything approved. For example, once Bob Ressler brought his profiling idea up to the deputy associate director and was told, we just investigate. We leave research to these sociologists. So I said, so what did you do? He said, I just had to wait till he retired, which he did and kept doing it. Yeah. And he said, all right, so I get blamed for it. He loved doing that. He was one of the original interns for the Teton and Mulaney, who were the two gurus, if you will, down there. So that was his strategy. So I always remembered that. And that's always a good one. You just go around them.
Well, yeah. I come from a teaching background. And when things like that, we would talk about the parking lot of education and the speed bumps that you run into. And you would just have to drive over the speed bumps.
That's good. Okay. There you got your own analogy. Good.
There you go.
Yeah.
Circling back a little bit. You got a lot of criticism for taking on defense cases after you had been so proactive in catching the bad guys. Can you reflect back on that a little bit?
Well, that would be because I wanted to see the other side. And I said, as long as I can bring science to bear, I was bringing science. I wasn't bringing any particular advocacy or anything like that. And I said, maybe I can explain what happened. Obviously, the person, if it was a murder case, and I felt he was guilty, but maybe it could help the jury in terms of the sentencing. So I've done about a half a dozen death penalty cases, and I think that's fairly legitimate to bring whatever you think of where this person went off the mark, if you will. To a jury, you can only move it from death to life.
Right.
And I feel that that's fair. So I've done them, and mainly because it really helped. When you can do defense work, you can get into what actually happened. With your prosecution, you don't get access sometimes to interview them or anything like that.
That's true.
Yeah, so that was my rationale.
Well, that makes absolute sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't do the act they did, but let's see why they did it.
You can look into mitigating and aggravating circumstances.
That's right.
If there's mitigating circumstances, that needs to be presented.
Yes, and that was one of the big cases, the Henry Wallace case. He had 44 marks against him, so to speak, and we were able to get 24 of them explained. So even though he still got the death sentence, he had 11 victims. But we had made headway on 24 of them. Just from our standpoint, we felt we had helped Henry in terms of the jury understanding it. Now, he's in a state where they have a moratorium on the death penalty. So he's still, years later, still on death row.
Well, it sounds like he had a fair trial, and sentencing is part of that.
Bob Ressler and I did the case because we had never had a serial killer that knew his victims. They always had been stranger, and he was African American. And all of our previous ones were white. And we thought we could contribute to science by examining him.
And you did?
Yeah, to see how similar or dissimilar he was. He's very similar. And he certainly had plenty of possible impacts, experiences that might have helped to explain. And we tried to explain that to the jury.
Sounds like you did to me. I meant to get to this when we were talking about the Cosby case, because I was saying I think that opened a door leading to Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, all of these cases, Me Too, which I think was so badly needed.
Yes.
And exposed a lot of monsters that were out there.
Yes, it did. And I thank Andrea for that. She really was the start of the Me Too movement, and we needed it. And it still is ongoing, if you will.
Hmm.
And it's interesting to see how the court system treats them. Look at Harvey,
Right.
and obviously nothing for Epstein, but look at how they're bringing up Epstein now. I don't know, have any idea what other evidence they're going to use. But the Larry Nassar case was a huge case. Oh, that was a really, to me, a really terrible case for these are young adolescent girls. He said he was doing a medical procedure and they believed him. And then they felt so conned and exploited, which they should have, because he did. And he
Yeah.
had hundreds of victims.
Oh, that left me sick. I
That
mean,
was
I have
really
two
bad.
daughters. You know, you think about but for the grace of God,
Yeah.
they were both athletic. What?
Yes.
And they covered it up.
Oh, yes. It really was a medical procedure, they tried to say. Luckily, they didn't get away with it.
But it took time. And meanwhile, there were still victims and he was still victimizing people. These
Yeah.
poor girls.
Well, that's what we call institutional betrayal. We've kind of come out with a newer thing where the institution covers up and betrays the victim.
Bet there's some real regrets there because it was just horrific. It's bad enough you have this guy who is abusing and taking advantage of these girls, these athletes who want so much to excel. And then the institution's like, oh, no, no, just no, everything's fine here. It wasn't fine. It was not
The
fine.
FBI, I think that was the case the FBI bungled. They didn't follow up. Two of the agents did not follow up on some. If it wasn't that, it was another one. So even the best, whatever best means, investigators, you really have to have people that are trained in trauma dynamics. And I don't think we've pushed that enough to make sure that in these cases they have consultation from a trauma expert.
Well, I was just going to ask you if we were doing better in our training. Obviously, we're not, but that's something at least that we can mention and say, hey, this is really an important component.
Right.
If you have this background and you're listening to someone who's reporting a crime and you're hearing the checklist,
Yep.
of behaviors, of speech, of patterns that you're talking about, the patterns of this behavior that authenticates what happened,
Right.
it improves your investigation.
Right. And it does depend on training. The education, many of the cases that fall apart are where they've had a lot of training, but more rural. We have to have, and FBI does try to do that, to do training, but they train their agents. But they have one agent for Montana and 2 or 3 states. The whole state is supposed to be, I think we found that out when we did the indigenous work. They talk about neglected, invisible people, the indigenous are.
Yes, I read the new research that just came out on that. There's not a lot of studies that have been done. Talk about a neglected area. What
Right.
were some of the most significant patterns that you discovered?
Well, some of the patterns match other cultures, which is good. In other words, I mean, it's not good, but because we looked at murdered children and females, but under 5, you can be pretty sure it's going to be the caregiver or the mom or somebody. Is that the one that the child has most? So that matches if they're trying to profile who might have done it. And now we're looking at a male group. So we're going to compare the girls to the boys on the various ages developmentally, under 5, 5 to 12, and then the adolescent group, and et cetera, et cetera. But even the elder group was amazing of who was the perpetrator there. And it was usually someone in the family. You had sons and grandsons killing the elder. So that matches, in other words, are you more at risk for a stranger versus someone that you know in a murder? And it seems to follow. So I think that's where the comparison is going to be most helpful for profiling. The Emily Pike case, that's the one we're pushing now, is who killed Emily Pike. And that's such a heartbreaking case that it's hard to know whether a serial killer got her, whether human trafficking. whether it was somebody in the family or on the reservation. More of the girls are going to be murdered on reservation than boys. That makes sense, I suppose, to some degree. But we're looking at all that, and that will be published, and hopefully people will take a look at it and be able to use it. I think that's the important thing, is that we have to raise that group to an area. The males are really ignored. It's bad enough that females get ignored, indigenous, but
Right.
the males. And there are big problems. There's the drug and the alcohol use, which we know about, and the poverty and that kind of thing. But I think there are some solutions that we need to certainly get some better training.
Yeah.
And working together. You've got your Indian police group, and then you have your, like your FBI or your non-Indian. So who does what crime? So they have to kind of fight it out for. So a lot of those things are all part of but we had that in religion, don't forget.
Mm-hmm.
In the Catholic Church, which we had a big thing, we had what is papal law versus whatever state law.
Secular law, yeah.
Secular law, yeah. So those are all tough issues, but some people are getting pretty expert on it. And again, they should reach out for some consultation to help them navigate, like you say, navigate those speed bumps.
Yes.
They go over. Yeah. I mean, that's all we do in research, is to identify problem areas and make some suggestions for how you can handle them.
I just was taken aback, and I totally agree with you, but I was taken aback in reading the recent research that the motivation was sadism. That we've heard all kinds of motivation from lust to power, control, but actual, like, out and out just sadism.
Yep. And that's something that really has to come out, because the torturing of people before they die has to have a nucleus for that, is in the offender. So how do we find that type of person that is so mean and vicious that can get that type of satisfaction? I don't think there's much written on it. I think I know somebody that calls it muted sadism too, that you have to be careful that some of the sadism is muted. So it's subtle, but it still is there. And we need to call that out.
Is it good that some of this would show up in autopsies? I guess, yes. That it seemed to play such a prominent role. It's horrifying and it's heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah, it is.
Well, I'm glad there's going to be more research into that. And it's this whole and understanding what is actually going on here. So I commend you for doing it and continuing to explore that. It needs to be looked at.
Needs to be looked at, but we do have some areas that we could look at, like in animal work. People do awful things to animals. So what would prevent them from going one step further to humans? There are some red flags out there.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention that. I don't know if you've heard of Wildlife CSI, but Cheryl McCollum, who is in law enforcement down in metropolitan Georgia near Atlanta, is starting the academy where you look more into the animals and what is happening with the animals. Cheryl McCollum, so she had to go to South Africa to get training in this because there was nothing in the United States.
Good for her.
We all have our fish and wildlife and all that, but the average law enforcement officer driving down the road stops a van that's filled with turtles, thinks he's taken a shipment to a pet store, and the animals are actually being trafficked. It's an actual crime. I took one of her courses, and the routes used by animal wildlife traffickers is exactly the same routes as human trafficking.
That's fascinating.
If you can see it, see what's going on.
Have they noticed any escalation from those people?
Yes.
I suppose it's like any kind of enterprise where they're selling groups. And so you have to look at who's really involved. That's fascinating. That group should get together with some of those of us that work with humans and children. The thing that can happen to children are almost unspeakable. They're so bad. Some of these cases are
Well, the
so
thing is,
bad.
you work together, we can shut down trafficking.
We've always had animal cruelty as one of the key of it used to be called the triad, McDonald's triad. They've not been able to ever statistically prove it, but I think that it's an important point about how people treat animals. And in fact, I don't know if this is good or bad, but in some of the rehab, they try to have people that have juveniles, especially, have murdered to learn to take care of an animal.
That's really interesting. That
Yeah.
actually is
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah. The basis being that they did not get that as a child, that they either watch someone be mean to an animal, and so you have to retrain them. So you can start off with fish or, it doesn't have to be like a cat or a dog, but then you would move up to that. I remember
You,
Berkowitz used to take pins, and his mother kept goldfish, and he would stick pins in them. So when the mother came home, all the goldfish are lying dead on top of the aquarium.
I can see where you might overlook that because they do tend to have a
Sure.
little bit of a short lifespan.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, because there wasn't any bleeding or whatever, and he got away with it.
yeah, look what happened there. Yeah, if you can rehab kids whose brains are still malleable and can rewire those brains, that's genius. From the goldfish to work your
Sure.
way up to starting to have affection and caring for something living, and then apply that to your human life.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Is there anything else you would like to say about your book?
I'd just like to say that we try to follow up on some of the cases we had in our first book because people go on, so people might be interested. So we talk about what happened to the three from the Duke Lacrosse case, certainly look at Cosby. So that I think is fascinating. We also put in there the first case that we could find where there was a court recording of it. Steven, my co-author, found this. It was called the Manhattan Well case, and we give that case. And I always say to people, "Do you agree with what happened, with the outcome?" So I'll have to read it and see whether they agree with it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The very first case we could find on use of expert witness, and then we have some new cases in there, and what it's like in the courtroom. Try to debunk some of the myths that are out there about the court. Court is very stressful. I've done it a lot, and I still find it very stressful. I put on my virtual bulletproof vest when I go in because the other side is going to come at me and try to discredit me. And I think that's what dissuades a lot of professional people from wanting to do any court work because it's very hard when you think that, you've got a big ego and you've done so well, and then you get this defense lawyer, saying something that's trying to discredit your work. So I think those are all some of the things that if people get to read expert witness, that's what we're talking about.
I remember that part vividly. The idea that, the prosecution, if you're testifying for them, you're prepared. You've gone
Yes.
through the case, you know the evidence, you're ready to go. Defense attorney, well, I don't know. What's he going to ask? Who knows? Yeah, I can see why that would be very anxiety prone.
Yeah, I did a case in the last month, which was really interesting. And I was a little annoyed till I found out what happened when they were qualifying me. The lawyer, the plaintiff's lawyer, wanted to bring out more of my background, and the defense lawyer objected, and the judge went along with it. So they really didn't hear too much about my background, especially any of the work I've done in the crime world. So I said then, because I wasn't there when his expert got on, the judge just allowed him to talk about how wonderful he was, and he was this big expert, and he had this and that on his resume, etc. But he said in the end, we won. We got millions of dollars in award. So as the plaintiff's lawyer said, it didn't matter. And he said, I didn't think it would. The jury just didn't buy that this wasn't traumatic to her. It was a case of a 14-year-old who was a babysitter down at Atlantic City. It's a case that's written up. Two lifeguards had pulled her into the little lifeguard shed and had assaulted her. And the one kept a relationship up with her for 4 years while she went to college, and then that broke up. Meanwhile, she's now in her 60s, and we chronicalized how much difficulty she had, and she never realized it was because of this very early experience that she had. And so the suit was against the lifeguard as well as the Atlantic City property. Anyway, long story short, she got a very, very fine award. So the jury, to answer your really original question, some juries are getting it. In other words, we were able to argue that her whole life had been affected by this incident that happened back when she was 14. Of course, being underage, and the male was 10 years older. He was a graduate student. So, we had a lot of things that I think that the jury could agree with. Some of these very old cases that are now coming up are winning. So I would encourage, if any of your readership, that they need to know that they should encourage people to at least seek out a lawyer to see if they do have a case, even though it might have happened 20, 30 years ago.
That is so powerful. I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you for that story. I hope it does empower people. That they were told, oh, just let it go, forget it happened, move on. No, trauma changes your brain. It has probably affected your entire life. None of us is bulletproof. As you said, we're not. Our emotions are emotions. Wow. Well, I want to thank you. This has been a delightful conversation. You're welcome back anytime.
Okay. Thank you. This has been very enjoyable. You're really good. You are so good. So thank you.
Am I? Thank you.
Yes, you are.
Oh my gosh. Ann Burgess thinks I'm fine. That really matters. Hey, are you going to be at Crimecon next year? Las Vegas.
If I'm invited. Have you got your ticket? A lot of the people there had already had signed up for Vegas.
I applied to be on Creators Row. I went to one session this past Crimecon. I had just done a book on the Aurora movie theater shooting.
Oh, okay.
The books were from the psychological end of it to looking at the perpetrator. I felt almost like an homage. I had to go to the Aurora theater shooting presentation.
Sure.
It was so powerful. It was absolutely fascinating. And quick story, Crimecon was over. I was sitting at the bar having a glass of wine all by myself, just decompressing. And I actually got a message from one of the officers who presented. And he said, how did you like my presentation? And I'm like, how do you even know I exist? I'm like, he's a detective, all right.
Great, yeah.
And I interviewed them. They're going to be on the podcast. I interviewed them yesterday.
Perfect. There you go. Good for you.
So Crimecon for me, I get to connect with so many listeners and fans and meet new people. And you, but I saw you briefly at the Clue Award. That was great.
Oh, good. All good. Okay. Onward.
Onward. Thank you so much. I will have you back when the next book comes out.
There you go. Okay. Sounds
Thank
good.
You so much.
Thank you.
Well, that was absolutely a delightful conversation with Dr. Ann Burgess, and I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. And her new book, Expert Witness, is out. I encourage you to pick it up. It goes into so much detail, and I learned so much about cases I thought I knew a little something about. She is just an exemplary person, and I really hope she is at Crimecon next year. Now, I will continue with A Tangled Web, a cyber stalker and deadly obsession and the twisting path to justice, written by Leslie Rule, shortly, as the twisted story of cyber stalking and harassment continues to unfold. Meanwhile, my Patreon Murder Bookies pick for our next book to be featured, I Survived by Victoria Cilliers. Set in the UK, it follows veteran physiotherapist and Americans, think physical therapist, Victoria, who falls madly in love with dashing soldier Emile Cilliers. They marry and have 2 children together. But then tragedy struck on Easter Day in 2015 when Victoria's parachute failed to open and she fell 4,000 feet or 1,220 meters suffering life-threatening injuries. Miraculously, Vicky survived, but soon the police discovered her parachute had been tampered with. What on earth was going on? And I look forward to sharing this true crime story with you. Thank you for listening. Introduce your family and friends to the Murder Shelf Book Club podcast. And thank you for being with me on our journey together into the stories, updates, and analysis on the best true crime books out there. I see you as you hear me. Share your thoughts with me at jill@murdershelfbookclub.com or on X, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Or you can join Patreon for $2 to $4 a month and help pick out our next book. We can talk true crime, and I'm teaching my serial killer class in a desire to give you more content. If you're going to Crimecon 2026 Las Vegas, use my code, all lowercase letters, one word, Murder Shelf, and save yourself 10%. Always trust your gut and lock your doors and windows. Written and produced by Jill, all rights reserved. Music, The Pewter Elephant by Blue Dot Sessions.